So, welcome. I'm delighted to be speaking this evening to Angela Gollat, who's our representative from Project SATYA. And we're here to share with the members of the Yoni Shakti, the movement Facebook group, who are aiming to eradicate abuse of women in yoga and to reclaim yoga as a tool for healing and justice and freedom. And Angela has been doing that fine work with Project SATYA, and I'd love for her to explain why now is a great moment to hear about Project SATYA. Angela, tell us about Project SATYA. How did it start up? What was the genesis?
Yeah, so really the genesis was Julie Salter's original post on December 10th, I believe, where she shared her Me Too post about the sexual abuse that she experienced by Vishnu Devananda many years ago. And the whole community started kind of clamoring to her page and trying to start dialogue. And we were all reaching out to the organization, of course, because at the time it felt like, could this possibly be true? Obviously, they're going to respond well. We had really high hopes for this organization.
So we're speaking about the Sivananda Yoga Vedanta organizations, which is an international, transnational, global yoga brand. It's everywhere, yeah?
And so far, it's had a very clean image.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's seen as, squeaky clean, traditional yoga lineage. And so for those of us who were part of that community, we were really looking to the organization to have a response. Now, they didn't have a response very fast, and they had a poor response right away where they were denying the claims. And so one of my other co-admins in the group, Antonia Abu-Matar, she actually started the Facebook page, which was originally called the Sivananda Yoga Community. And it just gathered everybody from the community to start talking about this. And more admins came on. Right now there's Antonia, myself, and Jens Osberger, who are the admins of the group. And so we've developed an investigation into all of these claims. Many people have come forward with claims of abuse of some sort or another. I think over 30 complaints have been made already to our investigators. And actually our lawyer, Carol Murchison, just messaged a couple days ago saying that it's kind of coming to a fever pitch right now because the closing date is coming on May 31st.
Yeah, and this was why I really wanted you to be able to speak today and to share this. So there's a closing date by which anyone wanting to bring testimony and evidence needs to approach the project before the end of May, yeah?
Yeah, so this is our original closing date, and there will be a interim report coming out right around that time. Now, our team's been talking, and we decided that we're actually going to extend the deadline for maybe about 7 to 10 days after the interim report comes out, so people can see what is happening with the information and what the investigation is all about, and they'll have a little bit more time to come forward. So we'll we're extending that a little bit.
So will the interim report cover the cases that have been brought forward up till now, or?
The interim report will cover the cases mostly centering around Swami Mahadevananda.
Okay.
So he's long retired in the organization, and the organization had stated that he was kind of retiring and going off into quiet seclusion in India. But what we're learning is they actually knew, some people in the organization, many people knew that he was actually abusing people, women in the organization, and that's why he left. And it happened over many years. And actually, I don't know if you've read any of the articles that have come out, but several of them reference a minor that that was Prahlad. I'm getting them all confused because there's so many stories. But Mahadev had many victims as well that he abused, and so all of those stories, or many of them, will be in that first report.
Okay. And so the idea is that once the report comes out, there'll be an opportunity for people to read and connect with the report, and you'll extend the opportunity for people to come forward with their testimonies for about 7 to 10 days after that report. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And could you describe, I mean, from the original impetus to open up the community Facebook group for people to come forward and discuss it, how you developed the process of the investigation? Did that come from within the community? Is that how it's a community funded investigation?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were recommended a few people that might be a part of that investigative team. Karen Murchison is one of them. She was the lawyer on the Project SATYA, or Project Buddhist Sunshine Project.
Okay.
So this in the Shambhala community, all the abuses that came forward, she participated there. And then Josna Pakanya, who you've spoken to, she came forward as well as a recommendation. So we kind of asked them if they would be our dream team and lead this investigation, because, you know, the organization was kind of doing their own investigation. They're still kind of doing an investigation now, only into Prahlad. They've canceled the investigation into Vishnu, and you know, none of the survivors trusted the organization to actually do a real investigation.
Because that's what I heard. I heard that they initially said, denied what had happened, then agreed to have an institutional, like, official investigation, and then abandoned it. Is that, but you're saying that they kept one part of it going, is that right?
Yeah, so, you know, even, so they said they were going to do an investigation, but they weren't really doing an investigation into sexual abuse within the organization widely. They had narrowed it to 2 people who people had come forward about. And then they eventually canceled the Vishnu Devananda investigation altogether.
And did they give a reason for that? I mean,
they cited COVID as the reason why it was canceled. So that's a little bit confusing. And, you know, they canceled that investigation an hour or 2 before the first survivor was set to testify to their lawyer.
Oh, no.
So imagine, you know, maybe 30 years of waiting for that moment where you would be able to testify. And there was a lot of convincing involved, actually, in getting those survivors to even come forward and trust that lawyer. And then an hour before, it was canceled. And they had put in a lot of work, as you can imagine, to prepare to testify. Emotional, you know, upheaval in preparing for that process. So it was like, you know, another layer of institutional betrayal that they canceled in that way. And, you know, when they canceled, there was people in the community that were still kind of holding out hope that the organization was going to do the right thing. And I think a lot of those people have really kind of abandoned that last bit of hope, because it's so clear that they don't have any intention of following through on the promises they made to the community. And mostly they seem to be invested in protecting the image of the organization.
It does seem that way. It seems as if the suffering of the survivors has been really compounded by them setting up an investigation, abandoning it, and then actually just mostly looking to kind of cover their own trail, really.
I mean, that it's like more complex trauma for the survivors, basically, that they had to experience during this process. And it sounds like this is really common for sexual abuse cases in yoga and spiritual communities. Like, sounds pretty standard. Not very few organizations, if any, ever really come forward and meaningfully do that investigative work.
No. And even if they're forced into doing it, like with the Satyananda investigations, then they don't actually sign up to any redress schemes to address the reparations that are necessary. Even if the invasion is funded by an external authority, the way it was in Australia with the Satyananda people, like nothing in terms of proper reparation has happened at all.
So this is, I mean, why Project Satya is so important. I mean, for lots of reasons. It's the first time survivors across the organization have been able to really speak out and share what has happened to them, because there's such a code of silence, you know, in these organizations. And it was the same in Sivananda, where you didn't talk about these things. And so it's a really big deal that these survivors have gotten to come forward, and that there was a community that was ready to hear them and support them and stand with them and defend them, and demand something from the organization, demand truth from the organization. So I mean, this has been a really huge success of Project Satya already. And really, it will capture the history of what has happened in that organization of these abuses. So as time goes on, as we know too, these stories kind of get buried, and then like another generation comes and they don't know. And yeah, it feels a little bit like we're just documenting history.
Yeah.
And who knows what will happen with that information? Like we can't really foresee entirely like how it will affect change or how it might affect the organization's future, but we do know that these stories will never be lost again. They will never be tucked into some dark corner. And that feels really important.
It's absolutely vital, because if the stories aren't heard, then it's an easy thing for the institution just to pretend like they never happened and just to move on. And another wave, as you said, of another people come in and they have no clue about what had happened in the past. Absolutely. And I think often a hope with those institutions that it'll all just blow over. I mean,
well, this was the rumors that were floating around early on, is that some of the swamis were saying it'll blow over in 3 months. Not to worry, these aren't true. And so that's how they were approaching all of this, which is really sad, because it's kind of, it sets it up from the beginning that they didn't have any intention of just honestly looking with some courage at what has occurred. You know, the goal right off the hop was to just wait the storm out. But it's real. Like, what happened was real. Abuses really happened. People were really harmed. Lots of people.
Yeah.
And not just 30 years ago. You know, there's still people in the organization now that are also, their names are coming up. And so it's very present too. It's not just historical.
Yeah, so you're not just looking at historic abuses. I mean, what Julie sort of spoke about had happened over decades and gone back a long way, but you're talking about stuff that is even happening like now, yeah?
Yes, and or very recent.
Yeah,
so the organization still, and you know, the complaints process in that organization obviously is problematic. They weren't actually dealing with complaints of sexual misconduct. No. And lots of information about that will come out in the reports, but it means that the organization can never be safe. You know, I think for me, having been there, I had an expectation when I was at the ashrams that I was safe.
Yeah.
And if there's no intention to actually address abuses, then what that means is like women aren't safe there. You know?
And what would it look like if we could imagine what would the correct response be? What could happen to actually, could there be any way to render an institution like that safe ever again? What would have to happen?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you've run into Jennifer Freed's work. She's done a lot of work around institutional betrayal and institutional courage. Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the first things is you need to honor the survivors. Like, you need to honor whistleblowers, and you need to really listen carefully. There's lots of re-education involved. There's lots of truth-telling involved, and transparency and reparations, and a change in leadership. A lot of the leadership knew what had happened and did nothing, or promoted people who had been abusing. And so it's a real mess. Like, I certainly have no idea what the answer is for Sivananda. It feels like such a mess to me. I can't quite see a way forward, but if they were committed to it, if they could demonstrate a real commitment, like, it would take immense commitment really to do this, like years worth of work of reflecting and, you know, work repairing with the community and with survivors and financial reparations and all the things. Maybe they could find a way forward. Someone would have to really want to invest there to do that.
But meanwhile, what I see is that Project Satya, you know, you could, with the level of institutional betrayal that's been experienced, there can be no expectation that any of that work will ever be done. But what I see with Project Satya is it's not just the investigation that's happening. There seems to me to be like a community mobilization to actually shine the light on this in other ways. So I've noticed that some quite major teachers have cancelled their retreats as a result, you know, at Sivananda venues. Could you speak a little bit about how Project Satya kind of mobilized community support to get that kind of thing to happen?
Yeah. You were cutting in and out there, but I think I got the gist right.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, good. Yeah, you know, in these
skipping a little bit here. You're back.
Okay, good. Yeah, in all these yoga communities, there's like, you know, like yoga celebrities, some people call them, like the people, the presenters, the big names that come. You know, one of my favorites was, you know, Krishna Das. I always went to see him in the Bahamas, and so, you know, we're letting these people know, or they're hearing on their own what's happening in the organization. And some of them are, you know, have the integrity to cancel, or to at least maybe even not cancel it right away. Some of them have tried to reach out to the organization and say, hey, do you plan on, you know, really truly addressing this issue? Yeah. And if they're not getting good enough answers, if they're not getting straight answers and truthful answers, then people are canceling, like Molly Burkham canceled. Stacey Dorick canceled. She did a chair yoga class. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that will continue. Apparently lots of presenters have canceled. I don't actually know all the names, but they've definitely lost a few presenters. So hopefully there's, you know, if the organization can have integrity, then other people will make personal decisions around whether or not they want to be affiliated with an organization that is clearly out of spiritual integrity, is not acting dharmically.
No. And that's what I see as one of the really powerful inspirations of what you've done with Project Satya, is that actually the project itself, regardless of what how the institution responds, you've actually mobilized funding and community awareness to reach out on quite a broad scale to make sure that people know about what's happened, and that actually that is it's like it's one tack to deal with this. We can't expect those kind of organizations to do anything other than protect their own multi-million-dollar assets. You know, they want to hang on to all of that power. But what I see is a really a vibrant community initiative. And you know.
And I think it's, you know, it's been a shock to all of us in the Shivananda community that they would want to first protect the organization. You know, like we really thought we were in a real spiritual organization. Like, you know, like I was shocked. Like I loved that organization. I loved the community. I loved the teachings. And so for them to act out of integrity was really surprising. And then along the way, a lot of us also learned about all these other organizations where this has also happened. And it's kind of like, this is the playbook. They're like doing it by the book, this response of, you know, protection. But it came as a shock for a lot of people. And so the community, has really gathered together. At first, the Facebook group, I mean, it's interesting to know, at first the Facebook group was called the Shivananda Yoga Community, which there wasn't a Facebook group called that, which tells you actually a lot, because there was no community. The organization, as it turns out, was very hierarchical, and there wasn't an actual community where people gathered together. And so we started that. Then we obviously were advised by the organization that we needed to not use that name.
Okay, yeah.
Very strongly worded, maybe legal letter. And so we had to change the name of the group because they didn't want us affiliated. And so, but you know, that whole community is still there and cares very much that the truth is told, and are supporting the survivors and sharing resources, and all of that is hugely healing. I think that's like, that's one of the most important pieces of this healing work, is that there's community that knows the organization, knows what it feels like, and so can like respond in a knowledgeable way to what a survivor might be sharing about what happened to them. So yeah, it's been really powerful.
Yeah, and that sounds to me as if it kind of leads, I'd love for you to speak a little bit maybe to people in other organizations or who've had experiences of this kind of abuse with individual teachers? Are there any kind of key points that you might want to share about how you can actually effectively support survivors, mobilize community support, and like shine the truth on what's happened? I mean, what's your really, what have you learned with Project Satya that might be of relevance to other people in similar organizations?
I mean, I feel like we're like babies in this process. There's like people that have been doing this work, yourself and Josna and Carol, other people, Matthew Remsky, who've been doing work for a really long time, would probably know way more than I would. A couple of the things that have become really clear for us is to start from a place of not denying that harm has happened.
Absolutely.
This is like step one, just like don't deny that it happened. And that's a very common response from people, especially people that want to protect the organization, is to try to defame the survivors that are speaking out. And so, and we talk about that a lot in the group too. It doesn't mean you have to believe them, because that sometimes is a stretch for people. I personally believe them. For people that can't quite get there, at least leave space where you're not denying the harm has happened. Let them tell the story. Hold the space of wondering maybe if this has happened or not. You know, providing resources is really important, so that people can understand what has happened to them. A lot of these organizations have cultic dynamics are involved. We're all just learning about that too. That wasn't a part of our vocabulary at all before this. And so when you start to learn about how control mechanisms work within these organizations, you see just a lot of patterns, and seeing those patterns helps you kind of break free from those patterns, obviously.
Absolutely. Because you start to see it replicated in one institution after another with one guru and one teacher, and you say, oh my goodness. And often people will move from one organization to the other because there'll be revelations in one, and then the diligent seekers will go to another organization, and then you start to see the patterns. And I think that's a really powerful awareness to have.
And many of us are just done with those kind of organizations. That's an ongoing conversation in the group. It's just like, well, I'm done with that, because who can be trusted with that much power? You know, who are we giving our power to? You talk about this obviously in your group as well. And I think we need to be have our eyes way more open to who we're giving our power to when on our spiritual path.
Absolutely. I mean, and sometimes I think it's really important to sense that we might not even notice that it might, some of the things, I mean, especially about a yoga practice, that it feels empowering. There's a strange paradox, because these are the tools for liberation and freedom. And evidently the reason that you loved your time with the Shivanandas, me too, you know, I was there in 90, whatever it was, 96, 95 in Quebec, you know, in their Valmar, and like loving the feeling of having this practice that felt so good and vitalizing and empowering. It can be really like incredibly difficult to sense that people giving those practices to a person to work with might also be stealing the power off you. So it doesn't even feel as if there's any kind of conscious decision. It's nobody's fault that we're disempowered in this way. It's part, as you say, of the structure of the hierarchy that's actually really quite toxic and fundamentally disempowering in the end. It's a horrible paradox.
It really is. It has a lot of us wondering, like, if there's all these people that have been doing yoga practice for decades and decades and decades, and they can be this unethical, like, what is the yoga practice working? Like, what's happening there? Like, it's waking people up a little bit to like wondering about those practices, and can we rely on people teaching them to be fundamentally like good people? And we never thought about that before. We kind of took that for granted, that they were knowledgeable and they were, you know, they were spiritual teachers legitimately. We will never do that again. We'll never be able to take that for granted. They're humans and they're protecting themselves, and we need to be awake to that.
Bless you. Yeah, it's a really powerful I think seeing what's happened here with Project Satya is obviously is both salutary. It's like, oh no, here's another one, you know. But it is also, it's been, you know, to see such a vibrant community actively working for truth is a real encouragement. So I'm really glad for people to know about this work. I think it's really impressive, and the fact that you've raised the funds for the whole community funded investigation. These things are expensive and time consuming and necessary, especially when the institutions can't be relied upon to produce them. So I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to say. I said we'd talk for about half an hour, which is kind of about now. And I'm wondering if there's other things you want to say about the project, and we'll make sure that people can find you. It's Project Satya. You want to talk about what Satya stands for as well? It's a very beautiful acronym, as well as truth. It means the word truth. But
yeah, it means truth. And so it's an acronym for Sivananda, accountability, yogic, truth-seeking yogic action.
Truth-seeking yogic action. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we got Sivananda in there because it felt important to connect it to Sivananda. Yeah. But yeah, so you have, you know, people that want to come forward still. I would just let you know that you can share your testimony anonymously. Like, you don't have to have your name associated with it if that feels like too much. Carol and Josna are really fantastic women. Carol's an excellent lawyer, and Josna is such a warm, wonderful listener that has so much knowledge and understands how these abuses happen in these organizations. And so, yeah, she could offer some really great support. Yeah, and then we're gonna, just a reminder, we've gotten a little extension here on the project. We're really happy. I'm really excited that you started this group too, Uma, because it does feel like these communities need to connect up somewhere and talk about some of the bigger issues. For, you know, women shouldn't have to like dodge and weave abusers while we're doing yogic practice. Like, what is it about? And I mean, obviously it's not just women. There's a lot of women, and probably disproportionately women, that have been involved in Sivananda and other organizations, but no one should have to, you know, navigate around abusers. And like, we're genuinely there to do a spiritual practice, and we should have safe spaces to do that. So it's really amazing that you're also starting this conversation in a bigger way. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for sharing the news of Project Satya, and I'm really delighted to be able to make sure that people in our group know about it. So our group is Yoni Shakti, the movement.com. There's a crowdfunding campaign to raise funds to fund a public awareness and education campaign, and it's going well. We actually have 9 days left to run on the campaign, and it's already 86% funded. But this is good, because if more comes in, we'd budgeted to run our education campaign for about a year, but like, we can go further and wider with it if there's more funds. So keep sharing. Yoni Shakti, the movement.com, that's the URL, and do join us on our Facebook group. That's how I met Angela, in our Facebook group, which is a thriving bed of actually joining up the dots between, for example, what Project Satya is doing with Angela and Antonia Abu Matar and all the admins who are holding that space. You know, we're all talking to each other around their Shivananda organization, Satyananda organization, abuses in, you name it. All of the yoga lineages are in there, and many individual teachers, and it provides a space for actually quite fascinating and positive discussion is happening. I think it's a really valuable space, and I'm delighted to welcome you into it. Glad to have met you, glad to share the news of Project Satya, and thank you for listening. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
Great. And I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to say goodbye, and thank you. All power to Project Satya and Yoni Shakti, the movement.com. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop the recording now. There we go. Goodbye. That's it.